and every day he had been more pleased with his son's wife. It was true, as the people said, that he was beginning to like her too. He liked to hear her sweet voice, and to see her sweet face, and as he sat in his armchair he used to watch her and listen as she talked to her boy, and he heard loving, gentle words which were new to him, and he began to see why the little fellow who had lived in a New York side street, and known grocerymen and made friends with bootblacks, was still so well-bred and manly a little fellow that he made no one ashamed of him, even when fortune changed him into the heir to an English earldom, living in an English castle. It was really a very simple thing, after all. It was only that he had lived near a kind and gentle heart, and had been taught to think kind thoughts always, and to care for others. It is a very little thing, perhaps, but it is the best thing of all. He knew nothing of earls and castles. He was quite ignorant of all grand and splendid things, but he was always lovable, because he was simple and loving. To be so is like being born a king. As the old Earl of Dorincourt looked at him that day, moving about the park among the people, talking to those he knew and making his ready little bow when anyone greeted him, entertaining his friends Dick and Mr. Hobbs, or standing near his mother or Miss Herbert, listening to their conversation, the old nobleman was very well satisfied with him. And he had never been better satisfied than he was when they went down to the biggest tent, where the more important tenants of the Dorincourt estate were sitting down to the grand collation of the day. They were drinking toasts, and after they had drunk the health of the Earl, with much more enthusiasm than his name had ever been greeted with before, they proposed the health of little Lord Fauntleroy. And if there had ever been any doubt at all as to whether his lordship was popular or not, it would have been set that instant. Such a clamour of voices, and such a rattle of glasses and applause! They had begun to like him so much, those warm-hearted people, that they forgot to feel any restraint before the ladies and gentlemen from the castle who had come to see them. They made quite a decent uproar, and one or two motherly women looked tenderly at the little fellow where he stood, with his mother on one side and the Earl on the other, and grew quite moist about the eyes, and said to one another, "God bless him, the pretty little dear!" Little Lord Fauntleroy was delighted. He stood and smiled, and made bows, and flushed rosy red with pleasure up to the roots of his bright hair. "Is it because they like me, dearest?" he said to his mother. "Is it, dearest? I'm so glad!" And then the Earl put his hand on the child's shoulder, and said to him, "Fauntleroy, say to them that you thank them for their kindness." Fauntleroy gave a glance up at him, and then at his mother. "Must I?" he asked, just a trifle shyly, and she smiled, and so did Miss Herbert, and they both nodded. And so he made a little step forward, and everybody looked at him. Such a beautiful, innocent little fellow he was, too, with his brave, trustful face. And he spoke as loudly as he could, his childish voice ringing out quite clear and strong. "I'm ever so much obliged to you," he said, "and I hope you'll enjoy my birthday, because I've enjoyed it so much, and I'm very glad I'm going to be an earl. I didn't think at first I should like it, but now I do. And I love this place so, and I think it is beautiful, and when I am an earl, I am going to try to be as good as my grandfather." And amid the shouts and clamour of applause, he stepped back with a little sigh of relief, and put his hand into the Earl's, and stood close to him, smiling and leaning against his side. And that would be the very end of my story, but I must add one curious piece of information, which is, that Mr. Hobbs became so fascinated with high life, and was so reluctant to leave his young friend, that he actually sold his corner store in New York and settled in the English village of Earlsborough, where he opened a shop which was patronized by the castle, and consequently was a great success. And though he and the Earl never became very intimate, If you will believe me, that man Hobbs became in time more aristocratic than his lordship himself, and he read the court news every morning, and followed all the doings of the House of Lords. And about 10 years after, when Dick, who had finished his education and was going to visit his brother in California, asked the good grocer if he did not wish to return to America, he shook his head seriously. "Not to live there," he said, "not to live there. I want to be near him, and sort o' look after him. It's a good enough country for them that's young and stirrin', but there's faults in it. There's not an aunt sister among 'em, nor an earl." End of chapter 15, read by Kara Schallenberg on February 17th, 2007 in Oceanside, California. And this is the end of Little Lord Fauntleroy by Frances Hodgson Burnett.